Through the ages, we tell the stories left in silence, the empires that rose and the ones that fell. History, not just remembered, but relived. This is Through Time.
Every day we walk past sidewalks. We buy coffee, rush to work, chat with friends on our phones, and avert our eyes from those who live beneath our feet. Men, women, sometimes children, with no roof, no address, no place to call home. But what if I told you this tragedy isn't new? That homelessness isn't a modern crisis, but a shadow that's followed us since the first cities were built, walls erected, and borders drawn. From the mud huts of Babylon to modern refugee camps. From freed slaves in Rome to war-displaced souls in Ukraine. These aren't just individual stories. They're a forgotten human truth. In this film, we'll journey through time to uncover homelessness roots, its causes, consequences, paradoxes, and humanity's faltering attempts to solve it. Not to mourn, but to understand. And only through understanding can we change. In prehistoric eras, when humans lived as nomadic hunters, the concept of home didn't exist as we know it. Tribes moved with seasons, water, and prey. Living under open skies wasn't a mark of poverty, but of nature. When no one had a permanent shelter, no one was homeless. But this changed radically with the agricultural revolution. With farming's advent 10,000 years ago, people settled. Villages became cities, then states. Private land ownership birthed social hierarchies: the landowner, the laborer, the enslaved, and the invisible, those without even a roof. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and ancient India, a home meant belonging. Those without one were often runaway slaves, wounded soldiers, or refugees. In Babylon, laws meticulously classified citizens. Those without family or shelter were outcasts or re-enslaved. In societies where worth was measured by status, there was no room for those with nothing. Greek philosophers viewed poverty differently. Athens offered aid to wounded soldiers, and citizenship held value. Yet, even in this early democracy, the homeless were stigmatized. Some deemed virtueless, others deviants from the ideal city. Still, traces of mercy existed. The temples occasionally offered food and shelter, especially during festivals. Ironically, Diogenes, a famed Greek philosopher, chose to live in a barrel on Athens' streets. He saw wealth as corrupting, but was he a free thinker, or a symbol of society's failure to belong? Rome was vast, wealthy, and teeming, yet home to thousands of destitute souls. In its forums, the unhoused scavenged for scraps or sold themselves into slavery for food. The Roman government distributed grain, but aid was scarce and politically weaponized. If you weren't a slave or wealthy citizen, you risked vanishing into homelessness or oblivion. In antiquity, homelessness wasn't just poverty's result. It reflected a society's definition of belonging. A house wasn't just walls. It was proof you mattered. From that moment, a fatal divide emerged. Those with homes valued, those without equals forgotten. When the Roman Empire fell, it wasn't just trade routes and armies that collapsed. It was the system that had once protected or ignored the homeless. In the Middle Ages, religion dictated your fate. Were you worthy of mercy, or the architect of your own misery? In Christian Europe, faith framed all social thought, even poverty. Society was split into three orders: those who prayed, the clergy; those who fought, knights and nobles; those who worked, peasants. But those outside this hierarchy, they were outside order, and thus outside care, even outside humanity. Who lost their land? Who was cast out of their village? Who fled famine or war? They became simply the homeless, the invisible, the criminal. The church was the sole institution offering aid to the homeless, but never without strings attached. Some monasteries housed strangers for a night or two. Almsgiving was encouraged, but only for the virtuous poor, those who'd lost everything through no visible fault. The Crusades, 1095 to 1291, triggered waves of displacement east and west. Peasants were conscripted, their lands left defenseless. Muslim populations faced expulsion, slaughter, or exile into endless deserts. War didn't just bring death. It left armies of survivors with no homes to return to. The 14th century brought humanity's worst catastrophe, the Black Death, 1347 to 1351. A third of Europe perished, entire cities emptied. Survivors lost families, livelihoods, homes. No one had time for mercy. Society itself was dying, too weak to save its most vulnerable. By the late Middle Ages, England, France, and Spain enacted laws to manage homelessness. England's 1388 Poor Law banned the poor from traveling without permits. Those caught begging outside their hometowns were whipped, jailed, or forcibly returned. Rather than address root causes, governments recast the homeless as a security threat. In the Islamic world, Waqf endowments funded shelters and food distribution. Khans housed travelers and the destitute along trade routes. Sufi lodges welcomed strangers without interrogation. Here, poverty was seen as a divine test, met with community mercy, not exclusion. Medieval homelessness wasn't just about losing a roof. It was about losing status, protection, belonging. Over centuries, a culture of exclusion crystallized. Those without homes forfeited the right to exist. While Europe celebrated art, reason, and discovery during the Renaissance, thousands in London, Paris, and Rome shivered in hunger. Homelessness in this era was no longer just suffering, it had become a crime. The 16th century shattered Europe's old order. Cities swelled. Farmlands were seized by wealthy landowners. Peasants flooded into cities, homeless, jobless, invisible. With no plan to absorb them, the poor piled into slums, branded a social plague. England's draconian laws reframed poverty as moral failure. 1531. Poor law. The deserving, poor, received aid. The able-bodied unemployed were publicly whipped and branded with a V for vagabond. 1572 law. Local taxes funded poor relief but with rigid moral scrutiny. 1597 law. Workhouses emerged, forced labor camps masked as charity. Homelessness was now state-punished, not just ignored, but exiled, flogged, enslaved. By the 17th to 18th centuries, England and France deported their homeless. Beggars arrested in London were shipped to North America as indentured laborers. Colonies teemed with poverty's slaves, stripped of legal rights or hope. Exiling the homeless didn't solve chaos. It outsourced suffering. Workhouses were built in England, France, Germany, and Ireland. The poor and homeless were detained there, forced to work hard in exchange for food, and men, women, and children were kept completely separate from one another. The prevailing thought in Europe at that time was influenced by theories such as human nature is corrupt, requiring brutal discipline. Idleness is sin, toil is divine. The myth took root. If you're homeless, it's your fault. A lie still weaponized today. After the 1929 crash, makeshift shantytowns, known as Hoovervilles, ringed cities, built from scrap wood and despair. Families slept in train tunnels or empty graves like in Los Angeles. An eyewitness account from 1932. My father wept nightly. No food, no home. Mother hid us in apple crates to sleep unseen. Even World War I veterans were brutalized. Their bonus army protest camp burned by troops. In Japan, rural collapse forced children into Tokyo's shadows, called yogisha, or night ghosts. In China, the 1937 Nanjing massacre created rivers of refugees, left to rot in rain-soaked slums. In the Middle East, the Ottoman collapse stranded Armenians, Kurds, and Arabs stateless. In Africa, the cruelest blow came not during the war, but after it. When the battles ended, the guns fell silent. But for tens of thousands of African soldiers, the struggle was far from over. They returned home not to parades or gratitude, but to stolen lands, stripped rights, and a haunting truth. Their sacrifice had earned them no place in the world they helped defend. Not even their humanity was recognized. Wars and depressions weren't just historical events. They birthed generations of the erased. A person without a home isn't worthless. But in times of crisis, they're treated as if they never existed. At the height of the 20th century, as humanity celebrated scientific progress, a silent crisis grew in the shadows of modern cities. Homelessness didn't vanish with modernity. It mutated. More invisible, more brutal. And at its core lay a seismic shift, the collapse of psychiatric care. In the early 1900s, those with mental illnesses were locked away in asylums, less hospitals than human warehouses, overcrowded wards, forced procedures, and endless isolation. By the 1940s, 500,000 Americans languished in these facilities. Many weren't mentally ill, just poor, addicted, or unwanted by families. Post-World War II, a perfect storm was brewing. Millions of soldiers came home, heroes in uniform but haunted inside. PTSD, not terrors, silent screams that no one could hear. But the world they returned to wasn't ready. Mental health care was primitive, fragmented, overwhelmed. At the same time, a darker truth surfaced from behind closed asylum doors. Tales of abuse, neglect masked as treatment, and in some places, unspeakable experiments. Public faith shattered, and with it, a cry rose for something new, for change. In the 1950s, a medical breakthrough sparked hope. Antipsychotic drugs like Thorazine promised a new era, one where institutions would fade, and humane, community-based care would take their place. But reality told a different story, a catastrophic failure. Asylums were shuttered, but the promised support systems, they never came. Thousands were discharged into a world unprepared to catch them. No treatment, no housing, no support. The result? A silent wave swept across cities. The mentally ill, once hidden behind walls, now left to wander the streets. The roots of homelessness, a web of causes. No one chooses the street. Homelessness isn't a decision, it's a verdict. A verdict passed by failed systems woven from neglect, poverty, and trauma. 1. Poverty, the obvious but incomplete answer. USA, 2023. 30% of homeless live in extreme poverty. Global South. Millions inhabit slums not even classed as housing. But poverty alone doesn't explain it. It ignites the tinder. 2. Mental illness, from asylums to sidewalks. 25 to 30% of homeless have severe mental disorders. In LA's Skid Row, untreated schizophrenia manifests as public screaming, self-talk. We closed institutions but offered no safety net, just concrete pillows. 3. Addiction, chicken or egg. Truth, homelessness fuels addiction, self-medication. Addiction accelerates homelessness, job loss, isolation. Tragedy, many nations still treat addiction as crime, not disease. 4. Domestic violence, the invisible exodus. Canada, 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ+ kids kicked out by families. Women, flee abuse with just the clothes they wear. 5. Loneliness kills 2. Elderly with no family spiral into homelessness after one medical bill. Widowers vanish into shelters after decades of marriage. We forget. Humans need roofs, but also hands to hold. 6. Housing crisis, when work does not equal shelter. San Francisco and London, teachers and Uber drivers live in cars. New Zealand, families reside in parking lots. Why? Rent has increased 300% since 1980. Luxury ghost apartments sit empty as investment schemes. 7. Disasters and displacement. Ukraine and Syria. War creates generations of stateless people. Climate crises. California fire survivors sleep in Walmart parking lots. 8. Policy as sabotage. Anti-camping laws make homelessness illegal. Prison releases dump inmates onto streets with $20 and a bus ticket. Final truth: homelessness is never one tragedy. It's where all our societal failures intersect. The social, economic, and psychological consequences of homelessness. Beneath the neon glow of cities that never sleep, there exists a parallel world. One without keys, without addresses, without belonging. Homelessness is not just the loss of shelter. It is the loss of identity, safety, and dignity. 1. Psychological toll, the invisible wounds. Homelessness begins long before the streets, in the shattering of the self. Chronic PTSD, not from war, but from daily survival, violence, isolation, and the nervous system locked in perpetual alarm. No deep sleep, no true rest. Depression and suicide, rates are 5 times higher than the general population. The crushing weight of being unseen, unwanted, unnamed. Psychotic breaks. Untreated schizophrenia or bipolar disorder distorts reality further. Without medication, the mind becomes its own prison. Erasure of identity. A man becomes that homeless guy. His story reduced to a beard or a tattered coat. Compassion, fatigue. The more homelessness is visible, the more society looks through it. 2. Economic costs, the hidden bill. Contrary to myth, homelessness is expensive to maintain. ER overuse. A $30,000 hospital stay for frostbite that preventive housing could have avoided. Lost potential. Teachers, artists, veterans, skills rotting on sidewalks. Tourism and investment. Cities that ignore homelessness lose $7 billion annually in revenue. 3. Media's double-edged portrayal. Pity. Poor souls, dehumanizing in their helplessness. Solutions and responses to homelessness across history. Homelessness has never been just about poverty. It is a mirror, reflecting where justice systems crack and societies fail their most vulnerable. From almshouses to housing first, this is humanity's unfinished struggle to heal its fractures. 1. Ancient to medieval, charity versus punishment, Roman era. Aristocrats gave bread to buy loyalty or salvation, never dignity. The unhoused were failures to be scorned. Middle Ages, monasteries offered shelter if you prayed and obeyed. England's 1531 vagabond law whipped the idle poor in public squares. Compassion was always conditional. Second Industrial Revolution, institutionalized cruelty. Workhouses emerged, forced labor camps disguised as charity. Night shelters in London and New York City were overcrowded petri dishes of disease. Key quote from an 1890s Inspector report: "These places don't rehabilitate, they break souls." Third, 20th century, the welfare state experiment post. 1929, crash. FDR's New Deal created jobs and transient housing. Europe built social housing, but only Scandinavia made it a ride. Post-World War II, veterans with PTSD were given pensions, but not housing. The UK's NHS treated bodies, but not homelessness. The Housing First Revolution. Finland's dramatic success in reducing homelessness stands in stark contrast to America's worsening crisis, revealing how policy choices shape outcomes. While Finland adopted a housing-first approach, providing permanent homes without preconditions, alongside health care and job support, the United States remains stuck in a cycle of temporary shelters and punitive measures. This fundamental philosophical difference has produced opposing results. Finland saw homelessness drop by 40%, while saving 15,000 euros annually per person in reduced emergency services. Meanwhile, homelessness in the U.S. has increased 7% since 2020, despite billions spent. The divergence stems from Finland treating housing as a basic right, requiring systemic solutions, while America's piecemeal approach remains hampered by bureaucracy, sobriety requirements, and community resistance. This comparison underscores a vital truth. Homelessness isn't an unsolvable problem. It's a policy failure. Finland proves that when governments prioritize permanent housing over stopgap measures, the results speak for themselves. 5. Ongoing challenges in combating homelessness remain. Despite progress in some nations, deep structural barriers still exist. Bureaucratic gridlock, supportive housing applications take months or even years to process. This leaves vulnerable individuals trapped in limbo. Social stigma, the persistent myth that homelessness stems from personal failure. It hinders both reintegration and meaningful policy reform. Legal shortcomings. Many governments still treat homelessness as a personal burden, not as a systemic emergency that demands urgent intervention. Funding gaps. Resources are often insufficient or misdirected toward temporary shelters instead of permanent solutions. And compounding all this, global crises, wars, pandemics, climate disasters, they create new waves of displacement, overwhelming already strained systems. Six, the path forward. Is ending homelessness even possible? The evidence is clear. Homelessness is not inevitable. Finland's success and Canadian pilot programs prove it. When we commit to political courage, treating housing as a human right over NIMBYism, sustainable funding, redirecting budgets from punitive enforcement to wraparound services, personalized support, mental health care, job training, case-by-case care, and a cultural shift, replacing blame with empathy. While ending homelessness entirely may be aspirational, we can still build systems that restore dignity, Proven models already exist. The question isn't how, but whether we choose to act. Where Finland streamlined bureaucracy to fast-track housing, the U.S. lets applications languish. Where Canada funds prevention, others waste resources on stopgap solutions. The difference? Political will to value people over politics. Homelessness is civilization's mirror. At the end of every road, civilizations aren't judged by their tallest buildings, but by how they treat their most vulnerable. Homelessness isn't just a lack of shelter. It's a tear in the social fabric, a crack that, if ignored, becomes a chasm, swallowing humanity itself. Are we exiled from our cities or from ourselves? Every era's response to homelessness reveals its moral progress. Some societies punished the poor, others offered conditional compassion. Yet today, in an age of AI and material abundance, we still see the homeless as outsiders. This alone begs the question, have we truly advanced? How is it that so many are still left behind? We walk past them every day. Homelessness won't be solved by policies alone, but by our willingness to see the person, not the stereotype. To ask, what's your story? For in every city, someone waits to be remembered.
Empires have fallen, heroes and tyrants alike, lost to the dust of time, but their echoes still shape our world. Every war, every rebellion, every forgotten soul is a thread in the story of who we are. Subscribe to Through Time and keep the history alive.